Her lungs burned for air as she clawed at the cloth covering her face, the Apache warrior's presence promising either salvation or a more merciful death than the bandits had granted her parents. When he lifted the fabric with unexpected gentleness, the compassion in his dark eyes shattered everything Sarah had been taught to believe about her enemies. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, turning the air into a shimmering veil of heat that distorted the horizon. Swift Arrow moved like a shadow across the barren landscape, his moccasins barely disturbing the dust beneath his feet. His eyes, dark and vigilant, scanned the terrain ahead, following tracks that told a story of violence and death. 3 days had passed since the raid on his village. 3 days of tracking the men who had killed 2 elders and stolen precious supplies. The bandits' trail led him deeper into contested territory, a no-man's land where neither Apache nor white man could claim true dominance. Only the vultures ruled here, circling patiently in the vast blue emptiness above. Swift Arrow paused, crouching low to examine fresh tracks cutting across the bandits' trail. A wagon had passed this way recently, the wheels carving deep grooves into the hard earth. White settlers, he thought, his jaw tightening, more intruders pushing deeper into Apache lands, bringing their diseases, their whiskey, their endless hunger for more. He was about to continue his pursuit when a dark shape caught his eye in the distance, the silhouette of an overturned wagon, half hidden in a dry wash. Instinct told him to ignore it, to stay focused on his mission. The affairs of white settlers were not his concern, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the unnatural angle of the wagon, or the absence of movement around it. With the silent grace that had earned him his name, Swift Arrow approached, every sense alert for danger. As he drew closer, the scene revealed itself in brutal clarity. The wagon lay shattered, its canvas cover torn and flapping weakly in the hot breeze. Supplies were scattered across the ground, flour forming ghostly patches in the dirt, broken barrels leaking the last of their precious water into the thirsty earth. And then he saw them. 2 bodies sprawled beside the wagon, their blood darkening the sand beneath them. A man and a woman, their clothes ragged and dust-covered. White settlers who had ventured too far from their settlements, too deep into dangerous territory. Swift Arrow knelt beside them, noting the precise bullet wounds that had ended their lives. This was not the work of his people, who preferred the silent efficiency of arrows and knives in such attacks. This was the work of guns, of bandits or renegades who roamed the borderlands, the same men he had been tracking, perhaps. He was about to stand when a faint sound reached his ears, barely perceptible beneath the whisper of the wind. Swift Arrow froze, listening. There it came again, a shallow, ragged breath. Someone still lived. Following the sound, he circled the wagon and found her half-concealed beneath a fallen wooden crate. A young woman, her dress torn and bloodied, her face smeared with dust and tears. A deep gash crossed her forehead, and her breathing came in labored gasps. But she was alive. Swift Arrow stood motionless above her, conflict tearing through him like a winter storm. She was white, one of them, the people who had driven his tribe from their ancestral hunting grounds, who had brought soldiers with their deadly rifles and fatal diseases. His people's suffering could be traced directly to hers. Yet as he looked at her pale face, he saw not an enemy, but a dying woman, no different from the mothers and daughters of his own people who had suffered at the hands of violence. The Great Spirit had led him to this place. To turn away would be to reject the path placed before him. With a decision that would forever alter both their lives, Swift Arrow knelt and carefully examined her wounds. The head injury was serious, but not immediately fatal. However, without water and shelter from the punishing sun, she would be dead before nightfall. He glanced up at the sky, gauging the sun's position. The bandits' trail was already growing cold. If he delayed his pursuit to help this woman, they might escape justice entirely, but if he left her, her death would be certain. Swift Arrow took a deep breath, the weight of choice heavy upon him. Then, with gentle hands that belied his warrior's strength, he carefully lifted the unconscious woman. She was lighter than she appeared, her body limp in his arms. Her head rolled against his chest, and a soft whimper escaped her lips, a sound of pure vulnerability that sealed his decision. "Be still," he whispered in his native tongue, though he knew she could not hear or understand him. "The desert may claim many lives, but not yours, not today." With the woman secured in his arms, Swift Arrow turned away from the wagon and the dead. The bandits would have to wait. For now, his path led elsewhere, toward an uncertain future that neither he nor the pale-faced woman in his arms could possibly imagine. The canyon walls rose around Swift Arrow like ancient guardians, their red-gold surfaces capturing the late afternoon sun. He had carried the unconscious woman for miles, his muscles burning with the effort, but his stride never faltering. This hidden place, a small box canyon with a freshwater spring, had been known to his people for generations. Here at least they would find temporary shelter from both the elements and prying eyes. The woman's skin burned with fever. Even in the relative coolness of the canyon's shade, sweat beaded on her forehead, mingling with the dried blood from her wound. Swift Arrow laid her gently on a bed of soft grasses beneath an overhanging ledge, then set to work with the efficiency of one accustomed to survival in harsh conditions. He gathered firewood first, arranging it carefully for later use. Then he knelt by the spring, filling his water skin and dampening a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. Returning to the woman's side, he began to clean the gash on her forehead, his touch precise and gentle. "You walk in two worlds today," he murmured in Apache, studying her face as he worked. She was young, perhaps 24 or 25 summers. Her hair, matted now with dust and blood, was the color of autumn wheat. Her features, though strained with pain, held a quiet strength that reminded him of the women of his tribe. Strong women who endured, women who survived. As he cleaned away the blood and dirt, Swift Arrow's mind drifted back to another time. To lessons learned at the side of White Dove, the medicine woman who had helped raise him after his mother's death. She had taught him which plants healed, which brought fever dreams, which could ease pain or stop bleeding. "All life is sacred to the Great Spirit," she had told him once, "even the lives of those who do not understand our ways." Had she foreseen this moment, this crossing of paths between him and a woman whose people regarded his kind as savages to be eliminated? The wound was clean now, the bleeding stopped. Swift Arrow gathered juniper berries and sage, grinding them together with a smooth river stone. The pungent mixture would help prevent the wound from festering. He applied it carefully, then bound her head with a strip of clean cloth. As darkness settled over the canyon, Swift Arrow built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize smoke. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rock walls, creating a world of light and darkness that seemed separate from the reality beyond. He prepared a thin broth of dried meat and wild onions, then lifted the woman's head to help her swallow a few drops. "Drink," he urged, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "You must keep your strength." To his surprise, her eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment, her eyes opened, eyes the pale blue of a winter sky just before dawn. They were unfocused, clouded with fever and confusion, but unmistakably conscious. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Please, water." Swift Arrow stilled, startled by the sound of English on her lips. He had learned enough of the white man's tongue during his time as a scout for the U.S. Army to understand basic commands and requests. Before his people had been moved to the reservation, before he had seen the duplicity of the bluecoats firsthand, he had believed that understanding their language might bridge the chasm between their worlds. He knew better now. Still, he raised the water skin to her lips. "Drink," he said in English, his accent thick but the word clear enough. She swallowed weakly, water spilling from the corners of her mouth. Then her eyes closed again, her brief moment of consciousness fading like morning mist in the sun's heat. Swift Arrow sat back on his heels, studying her face in the firelight. Who was she? What was her name? What circumstances had brought her and her family to this dangerous territory? And what would become of her now, alone in a land that had already claimed the lives of those she traveled with? These questions circled in his mind as he settled himself against the canyon wall, his rifle across his knees. He would not sleep deeply tonight. The bandits might still be in the area, and there were other dangers in the desert night: coyotes, mountain lions, rattlesnakes. And then there was the woman herself. If she woke in the darkness and saw him, an Apache warrior, what terror might grip her fever-addled mind? No, Swift Arrow would keep his vigil through the night. Tomorrow would bring its own decisions. For now, it was enough that they had found shelter, that she still breathed, that the path ahead, though uncertain, remained open before them. Above, the stars emerged one by one in the deepening blue-black of the desert sky, ancient and indifferent to the small drama unfolding beneath their eternal gaze. Dawn broke over the canyon rim, painting the sky in strokes of amber and gold. Swift Arrow had kept his vigil through the night, moving only to tend the fire or check on the woman's breathing. Her fever had not broken, but neither had it worsened. A small victory against death's persistent shadow. He was gathering more water when he heard it, a sudden intake of breath, followed by the rustle of movement. Returning to the shelter, he found her awake, pressing herself against the canyon wall, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Who?" she began, her voice cracking with dryness. "Who are you? Where am I?" Swift Arrow set down the water skin and remained still, giving her space. He recognized the look in her eyes, the primal fear of a wounded animal cornered by a predator. He had seen it before in the eyes of settlers who encountered his people on the trail. "I am Swift Arrow," he said in careful English. "You are safe." The woman stared at him, her gaze darting from his face to his hands, to the rifle leaning against the rock wall. Then her hand went to her forehead, feeling the bandage there. "My family," she whispered, memory visibly flooding back. "The wagon. There were men with guns." Her breath quickened, her pale face growing even whiter. "My father and mother, they are gone," Swift Arrow said simply, seeing no reason to soften what she already knew in her heart. "I found you, brought you here." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back with visible effort. This surprised him. Many white women he had observed seemed to weep freely, unlike the women of his tribe who bore their grief with stoic dignity. This one seemed to have a stronger spirit. "You saved me," she said, not quite a question. Swift Arrow nodded once, then offered her the water skin. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, drinking deeply before handing it back. "My name is Sarah Collins," she said, her voice steadier. "My family was traveling to Tucson. We were told the trail was safe." A bitter edge crept into her words. Clearly, we were misled. Swift Arrow watched her carefully. Men who attacked, not Apache. Bandits. Same men who raided my village. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You were tracking them when you found me." He nodded again. Sarah Collins tried to sit up straighter, wincing as pain shot through her head. "Why did you help me? Why not leave me to die?" The question was blunt, surprising in its directness. Swift Arrow considered his answer carefully. "All life sacred to Great Spirit," he finally said, echoing White Dove's teaching. "And—" He hesitated, searching for the right words in English. "I have seen enough death." A silence fell between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. Sarah Collins studied him with an intensity that few white people had ever directed at him, as if seeing him as a man rather than merely an Indian. I've heard stories about the Apache, she said slowly. Terrible stories. I have heard stories about white men, Swift Arrow replied evenly. Also terrible. Unexpectedly, a small smile touched her lips. I suppose that's fair. He moved closer then, kneeling beside her to examine her wound. She tensed but didn't pull away as his fingers gently probed the bandage. Head wounds bleed much, but yours not deep, he said. Fever is danger now. How long have I been here? She asked. One night, found you yesterday. Sarah looked past him to the canyon beyond. Where are we? Hidden place, safe for now. Her eyes returned to his face. And what happens when I'm well enough to travel? What then, Swift Arrow? The question hung in the air between them. Swift Arrow had been asking himself the same thing since he'd first lifted her into his arms. By helping her, he had already stepped off the warrior's path. The men who had attacked his village might be miles away by now, and even if she recovered fully, where would he take her? To the white settlements, where an Apache's presence might be met with bullets. To his own people, who would view her with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. First, you heal, he said finally. Then we decide. She seemed to accept this, her shoulders relaxing slightly as exhaustion reclaimed her. I haven't thanked you, she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy, for saving my life. Swift Arrow stood, moving back to his position against the wall. Sleep now. Talking takes strength you need for healing. As Sarah drifted back into sleep, Swift Arrow's mind was more troubled than before. In saving her life, he had bound their fates together in ways neither of them could fully comprehend, and in the depths of his warrior's heart, he felt the first stirring of something unexpected, a connection to this pale-faced woman with eyes the color of the winter sky. The second day passed in a haze of fever dreams for Sarah. Swift Arrow watched as she drifted between consciousness and delirium, her skin burning one moment, shivering with cold the next. He prepared infusions of willow bark and desert sage, coaxing the bitter liquid between her lips whenever she was lucid enough to swallow. When she trembled with chills, he covered her with his own blanket, himself sitting bare-shouldered in the night air. By the third dawn, her fever broke. Swift Arrow found her awake, her face turned toward the canyon entrance where the first light of morning spilled over the rim like liquid gold. I dreamed of my mother, she said without preamble, not turning to look at him. She was hanging laundry on the line behind our house in Missouri. The sheets were so white against the blue sky. Her voice caught. I'll never see her again, will I? Swift Arrow moved to sit across from her, the small fire between them. No, he said simply. But she walks with ancestors now. Not gone, just elsewhere. Sarah looked at him then, her blue eyes clearer than they had been since he found her. Is that what your people believe? That the dead are still with us? He nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. The dead watch over the living, guide us, protect us when they can. My father was a preacher, Sarah said, her fingers absently tracing patterns in the dust beside her. He believed in heaven and hell, streets of gold for the righteous, eternal fire for sinners. A shadow crossed her face. He brought us west because he felt called to minister to the frontier settlements and to the Indians. The irony of her situation was not lost on either of them. Swift Arrow's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. And what does the daughter of the preacher believe? He asked. Sarah was silent for a long moment. I don't know anymore, she finally admitted. I believed because I was taught to believe. But now... She gestured vaguely at the canyon, at him, at the vast wilderness beyond. Now everything is different. Swift Arrow understood more than she might realize. His own beliefs had been tested when the white man's government forced his people onto the reservation, when promises were broken time and again, when children died of diseases brought by the settlers. Hunger? He asked, changing the subject. He had been roasting a rabbit caught in one of his snares. Sarah nodded, sitting up straighter. Her movements were still cautious, but stronger than the day before. Swift Arrow handed her a portion of meat, wrapped in a large leaf. She accepted it gratefully, eating with the deliberate focus of someone who had gone too long without food. As she ate, Swift Arrow studied her openly. The color was returning to her face, and without the mask of fear and fever, he could see that she was beautiful by any standard, Apache or white. It was not simply her features, pleasing though they were. There was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, a resilience that commanded respect. "You stare at me," Sarah said, breaking into his thoughts. Yes, he admitted unashamed. "You are not what I expected." "And what did you expect? White woman afraid, crying, hating?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "I am afraid. I'd be a fool not to be. But tears won't bring back my parents, and hate—" She paused, considering. "Hate won't keep me alive." Swift Arrow inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. "You are strong, Sarah Collins." It was the first time he had used her name, and something flickered in her eyes at the sound of it on his lips. "Not strong enough," she said softly. "I couldn't save them. No one could. Men who attacked, skilled killers. 3, maybe 4 guns. How do you know? Tracks, shell casings, the way your parents—" He stopped, not wanting to speak of the specific violence visited upon her family. Sarah looked down at her hands. "They were shot while trying to protect me. I hid under the wagon. I should have done something, anything." "Then you would be dead too." Swift Arrow's voice was matter-of-fact. "You live. Now you honor their sacrifice by staying alive." A tear slid down her cheek, but she brushed it away quickly. "And how do I do that, Swift Arrow? I'm in the middle of nowhere with no supplies, no weapons, and no idea which direction leads to safety." "You have me," he said simply. The words hung between them, laden with significance neither fully grasped. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "it seems I do." Later that day, when Sarah felt strong enough to stand, Swift Arrow showed her the spring. She washed her face and hands, sighing as the cool water refreshed her skin. Then, with his help, she walked a short distance along the canyon floor, her legs unsteady after days of lying down. "It's beautiful here," she said, gazing up at the towering walls with their striations of red and gold and cream. "I never imagined the desert could hold such wonders." "Desert keeps its beauty hidden," Swift Arrow replied, "shows only to those who know how to look." As the sun reached its zenith, they sat in the shade of a twisted juniper. Sarah had been silent for some time, lost in thought. "The men who killed my parents," she finally said, "are they the same ones who attacked your village?" Swift Arrow nodded. "I believe so. Same guns, same direction of travel." "Then they're still out there," Sarah said, her voice hardening, "still free to hurt others." "Yes." She turned to look directly at him. "And you were tracking them when you found me?" Again he nodded. "So by helping me, you let them escape?" Swift Arrow met her gaze steadily. "I made a choice." The weight of that choice and all it implied settled over them both. Sarah reached out and, after a moment's hesitation, placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but freighted with emotion. Swift Arrow looked down at her pale hand against his copper skin. In all his 27 years, no white person had ever touched him with such genuine gratitude. The sensation was strange, unsettling yet not unwelcome. "We should return," he said, standing and offering his hand to help her up. "You need rest." As they walked back toward their shelter, Swift Arrow remained acutely aware of the boundaries they had already crossed, and those that still lay before them, as vast and challenging as the desert itself. By the fourth day, Sarah's strength was returning. The morning found her attempting to mend tears in her dress with fibers Swift Arrow had shown her how to strip from yucca plants. Her fingers were clumsy with the unfamiliar material, but her determination never wavered. "In St. Louis, I had a sewing box with the finest needles and thread," she said, wincing as she pricked her finger yet again. "I never thought I'd miss something so simple." Swift Arrow watched her from where he was fashioning new arrows, his hands moving with practiced precision. "Many things we value only when lost." Sarah glanced up at him. "What do you value, Swift Arrow?" He considered the question, his dark eyes thoughtful. "Freedom, honor, the old ways of my people." "The old ways," she repeated. "Before we came." "Yes." A silence fell between them, the weight of history pressing down like the midday sun. Sarah set aside her mending, looking directly at him. "Tell me about your life," she said, "before all this." Swift Arrow's hands stilled. No white person had ever asked about his life, his world. They saw the Apache as obstacles or enemies, not as people with stories worth knowing. "I was born near what white men call Dragoon Mountains," he began, his voice low. "My father was war chief of our band. My mother died when I was 8 summers old, taken by fever. White Dove, our medicine woman, raised me, taught me healing plants, hunting ways, how to read signs others miss." A rare, brief smile touched his lips. She said I moved like shadow, silent, quick. Gave me my name. "Swift Arrow," Sarah murmured. "It suits you." He inclined his head in acknowledgement, then continued. "When I was 16, I joined war party against Mexican soldiers who killed our women gathering plants. I took first scalp there." He glanced at her, expecting revulsion. But Sarah's expression remained attentive, uncensored. "Later, when white government promised peace if we helped against other tribes, I became scout for blue coat soldiers, learned English, learned white man's ways." His expression darkened. "Learned white man's promises worth nothing." "What happened?" Sarah asked softly. Swift Arrow's jaw tightened. "Treaty broken, land taken, my people forced to reservation, dry land, poor hunting. Many died first winter." He set down the arrow he'd been working on. "I left. Could not watch my people waste away like caged eagles. So you became an outlaw," Sarah said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "To your people, yes. To mine, I am free Apache. I hunt. I trade. Sometimes I guide those who pay well and treat land with respect." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "And your family? Do they remain on the reservation?" "My father died resisting soldiers. I have one sister, married to warrior called Tall Elk. They stay with what remains of our band." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and the simple sincerity in her voice touched something in Swift Arrow's chest. "Your turn," he said. "Your story." Sarah sighed, her gaze drifting to the canyon wall, as if seeing beyond it, to her past life. "I was born in St. Louis. My father was a respected minister with a fine church and congregation. My mother came from a wealthy family. She gave up much to marry a preacher." A sad smile curved her lips. "I had a brother once, James. He died of typhoid when he was 12. I was 10. Swift Arrow nodded, understanding the loss of siblings all too well. "After James died, my father became different, more fervent in his beliefs. He began to speak of visions, of God calling him to the frontier to bring salvation to settlers and natives alike." Sarah's fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt. "My mother didn't want to go, but she would never defy him publicly. So we sold our home, packed our belongings, and joined a wagon train west." She paused, her blue eyes shadowed with memory. "I was engaged to be married." His name was William Porter, the son of a banker. A good match, everyone said. But William wouldn't leave St. Louis, and I couldn't leave my parents, so I broke the engagement and came west. Her voice hardened slightly. William wasn't too heartbroken. Last I heard, he was courting the mayor's daughter. Swift Arrow watched the emotions play across her face, regret, resolve, and a flicker of anger. "You did not love this, William," he observed. Sarah looked up, startled by his perception. "No," she admitted. "I didn't. It was an arrangement, nothing more." "Apache women choose their husbands," Swift Arrow said. "Man may ask, but woman decides." "That sounds—" Sarah hesitated, as if afraid to voice her thought. "Civilized?" Swift Arrow suggested, a hint of challenge in his tone. To his surprise, Sarah laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to lighten the very air around them. "I was going to say sensible, but yes, perhaps more civilized than many of our so-called civilized customs." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the vast differences between their worlds seemed to shrink, revealing unexpected common ground. The moment was shattered by a sound that made them both freeze, the distant crack of a rifle shot. Swift Arrow was on his feet instantly, motioning for Sarah to stay low and silent. He moved to the canyon entrance, every sense alert. Another shot echoed closer this time, followed by the faint sound of men's voices. "Bandits," Sarah whispered, appearing at his side despite his warning. He shook his head. "Soldiers, blue coats." His expression was grim. "Hunting. For what?" Swift Arrow turned to her, his face hardening into the mask of a warrior. "For me, or any Apache not on reservation." Sarah's hand went to her throat. "What do we do?" "We must leave, now." He moved quickly to gather their few possessions, his rifle, knife, the water skin, what remained of their food. "But why would they be searching here?" Sarah asked, hurriedly folding the blanket she'd been using. Swift Arrow paused, fixing her with a penetrating gaze. "Maybe they follow my trail from wagon. Maybe they look for you." The implication hung between them like a drawn blade. If the soldiers had found the wagon and the bodies of Sarah's parents, they would be searching for survivors, or for the Indians they would surely blame for the attack. "They'll kill you if they find you," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Yes. Even if I tell them you saved me." Swift Arrow's smile was bitter. "White soldier sees Apache, thinks only enemy. Words change nothing." Sarah straightened, a fierce determination replacing the fear in her eyes. "Then we need to make sure they don't find you." Swift Arrow stared at her, caught off guard by her use of "we" rather than "you." This white woman, daughter of a preacher, raised to fear and despise his kind, was aligning herself with him against her own people's soldiers. In that moment, as the sounds of the patrol grew ever closer, Swift Arrow realized that the path before them had just become infinitely more complex and dangerous than either of them could have imagined. They moved swiftly through the shadows at the canyon's edge, Swift Arrow leading the way with the instinctive grace of a predator. Sarah followed as best she could, her city-bred legs unaccustomed to the rough terrain. Each time she stumbled, his hand was there, steadying her without a word, before pressing onward. The soldiers' voices grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Swift Arrow held up his hand, motioning for her to stop. They crouched behind a large boulder as he assessed their options. "Too many to fight," he whispered. "Must hide, then escape when dark." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the soldiers would hear it. Swift Arrow studied the cliff face beside them, then pointed to a narrow crevice partially hidden by scraggly brush. "There," he said. "Can you climb?" Before she could answer, a voice called out from the canyon entrance, not 50 yards from where they hid. "Check every inch. If there are survivors, we need to find them, and keep your eyes open for Indian sign." Swift Arrow's expression didn't change. But Sarah felt the tension coiling in him like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. Without another word, he guided her to the crevice and boosted her up. The opening was barely wide enough for her shoulders, but she squeezed through, feeling the rough stone scrape against her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. The crevice widened into a shallow cave, just deep enough for them both to hide. Swift Arrow climbed up after her with silent efficiency, his body pressing close to hers in the confined space. In the dimness, his eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, watchful and alert. "Stay still," he breathed against her ear. "No sound." Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on controlling her breathing. She was acutely aware of Swift Arrow beside her, the heat of his body, the faint scent of smoke and sage that clung to his skin, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat where his chest pressed against her shoulder. In all her 24 years, she had never been so close to a man who wasn't family. If her father could see her now, the thought of her father brought a fresh wave of grief, but she pushed it aside, survival first, mourning later. Below, boots crunched on gravel as the soldiers moved through the canyon. Through a small gap in the rocks, Sarah could see snatches of blue uniforms, the glint of rifle barrels in the sun. They were methodically searching every possible hiding place. "Sir, over here," a voice called out. "Looks like someone's been camping." Sarah tensed. They had found their shelter, the remains of the fire, perhaps even some sign of her presence. Swift Arrow's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and reassuring around hers. "Recent fire, sir. Still warm. And look, a piece of cloth. Could be from a woman's dress." "Any sign of Indians?" "Hard to say, sir. Ground's pretty trampled." A new voice spoke, authoritative and grim. "Those savages took her all right, just like they killed her folks. Probably didn't get far with a white woman in tow. Fan out and widen the search. They can't have more than a day's head start." Sarah felt Swift Arrow's grip tighten momentarily before relaxing. His face revealed nothing, but she sensed the controlled anger radiating from him. The soldiers continued their search, moving farther into the canyon. For hours, they remained frozen in their hiding place, the sun's path across the sky marked only by the shifting shadows on the stone walls. As dusk approached, the soldiers regrouped near the spring. Their voices drifted up to the hidden cave. "No sign of them, Captain. You want to make camp here for the night?" There was a pause, then, "No. We'll head back to the main trail and rejoin the company, resume the search at first light. If that girl's still alive, she won't last much longer with those heathens." Only when the sounds of the patrol had faded completely into the distance did Swift Arrow move. He eased himself to the edge of the crevice, scanning the canyon below before signaling that it was safe to descend. Sarah's muscles screamed in protest as she climbed down, stiff from hours of forced immobility. Swift Arrow caught her as she reached the ground, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close, the tension of their shared danger creating an unexpected intimacy between them. Sarah was the first to step back, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a trembling hand. "They think you killed my parents," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They think you took me prisoner." Swift Arrow's expression was unreadable in the gathering darkness. "Easier to blame Apache than hunt real killers. But that means they won't stop looking. They'll keep tracking us." "Yes." He moved to the canyon entrance, surveying the darkening landscape beyond. "We travel at night, safer." As Swift Arrow gathered what supplies remained, Sarah stood watching him, a realization dawning that made her blood run cold. "If they find us together," she began. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "They will think you my captive or worse. And if I tell them the truth matters little. They see what they expect to see." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the lingering heat of the day. "What will they do to you if they catch us?" Swift Arrow's answer was blunt. "Hang me, or shoot me where I stand." "And me?" she asked, though she already knew. His gaze held hers steadily. They will rescue you, take you to nearest fort or settlement, but always they will wonder. His voice trailed off. Wonder if I've been defiled, Sarah finished, the harsh word falling like a stone between them. If I've been tainted by my time with a savage. Swift Arrow said nothing, but his silence confirmed her words. Sarah squared her shoulders, a newfound resolve hardening within her. Then they mustn't find us. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You choose to stay with me, even knowing the danger. You saved my life, Swift Arrow. You tended my wounds, fed me, protected me. You gave up your hunt for justice to care for a stranger. Sarah took a deep breath. I don't know what lies ahead for either of us, but I know that I trust you more than I trust those men with guns who are so quick to judge what they don't understand. Something shifted in Swift Arrow's eyes, a softening, a recognition. He nodded once, accepting her decision without further question. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped out of the canyon that had been their sanctuary. The desert night enfolded them in its vast, star-scattered embrace as they moved silently across the landscape. Two figures from different worlds, bound together by circumstances neither could have imagined. Sarah followed Swift Arrow's lead, matching her steps to his, learning the rhythm of stealth. When they paused on a ridge to rest, the valley below spread out before them like a dark sea, the distant campfires of the soldiers visible as tiny pinpricks of light. Where will we go? Sarah asked, her voice hushed. Swift Arrow gazed toward the western horizon. There is place, hidden valley where streams never dry, even in hottest summer, 2 days' journey, maybe 3. And then, he turned to look at her, his face illuminated by starlight. Then we decide again. Each day, we choose path to walk. As they continued their journey through the night, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed within her. The proper preacher's daughter from St. Louis was fading with each step, replaced by a woman who was learning to survive in a world where the old rules no longer applied. And beside her walked Swift Arrow, enemy, savior, and increasingly, a man she could no longer see through the simplistic lens of her former life. They traveled through the night and into the pale hours of early morning, stopping only when the rising sun threatened to expose them to any watchful eyes. Swift Arrow found them shelter in a cluster of wind-sculpted rocks, creating a small, defensible space hidden from casual observation. As Sarah sank gratefully to the ground, exhaustion claiming her limbs, she marveled at her companion's seemingly inexhaustible strength. Sleep, Swift Arrow told her, offering the water skin. I keep watch. You need rest too, Sarah protested, though her eyelids were already growing heavy. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Apache warriors can go 3 days without sleep when needed. I am fine. Despite her fatigue, Sarah studied him with new eyes. In the soft light of dawn, with his guard slightly lowered, she saw beyond the stoic warrior to the man beneath. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes spoke of laughter as well as hardship. The gentleness with which he handled their dwindling supplies revealed a care that contradicted everything she'd been taught about savage Indians. What are you thinking? Swift Arrow asked, catching her gaze. Sarah blushed, unaccustomed to being so transparent. I was thinking how different you are from the stories I've heard all my life. And you, he replied, are different from stories Apache children hear about white eyes. What stories are those? Swift Arrow settled himself against a rock, rifle across his knees. That white women are weak, cry at smallest pain, that they fear dirt and sun, that they look at Apache with disgust. His dark eyes held hers. You are not these things. The simple observation warmed something inside her. My mother always said I was too stubborn for my own good, too curious, too willing to question. Sarah drew her knees up, resting her chin on them. I used to think those were flaws. Now I wonder if they're the only reason I'm still alive. Swift Arrow nodded. In desert, those who cannot bend break. You bend, Sarah Collins. You adapt. She smiled at that, then surrendered to her body's demands for rest. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, the sun was already sliding toward the western horizon. Swift Arrow was gone from his post, but before panic could take hold, she spotted him returning from beyond their small camp, a rabbit slung over his shoulder. You hunted, she observed as he approached. We need food for journey. He knelt, efficiently preparing the rabbit for cooking. Soldiers searched east of here at midday. They did not come close. You've been watching them while I slept? He nodded. They search wrong direction now. Think we headed for settlements. Relief washed through her, followed by a pang of guilt. Those men were searching for her, believing they were on a rescue mission, while she deliberately hid from them. Swift Arrow, perceptive as always, read her thoughts. You feel guilt for choosing to stay with enemy. You're not my enemy, Sarah said firmly. But yes, I feel conflicted. Those soldiers think they're trying to save me. And are you in need of saving? There was a challenge in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. Sarah considered the question carefully. I needed saving when you found me by the wagon. I would have died without your help. She met his gaze directly. But now? No, I'm not some helpless damsel to be rescued. I'm making my own choices. Satisfaction flickered in Swift Arrow's eyes. Good answer. As twilight deepened around them, they shared the modest meal. Sarah had never imagined she could find rabbit cooked over a small fire so delicious, but hunger proved a powerful seasoning. Afterward, as they prepared to continue their journey, Swift Arrow handed her something wrapped in a piece of cloth. For walking, he said. Sarah unfolded the cloth to reveal a pair of moccasins, roughly fashioned but sturdy. When did you make these? While you slept. Your boots not made for desert. These better. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Sarah removed her worn, city-made boots and slipped on the moccasins. They were surprisingly comfortable, conforming to her feet in a way her rigid boots never had. Thank you, she said, meaning it deeply. They set off again as darkness fell, traveling under the blanket of stars that stretched endlessly above the desert. Swift Arrow set a steady pace, slower than the previous night in deference to Sarah's endurance. She walked beside him now rather than behind, her steps growing more confident on the uneven ground. Tell me about this place we're going, she said after they had been walking for some time. Hidden Valley, Swift Arrow replied. Few know it exists. Spring feeds small lake, trees grow tall, grass stays green even in summer. Good hunting. Cave with paintings made by ancient ones. It sounds beautiful. How did you find it? My father showed me when I was boy. Said if trouble ever came, I should go there. His voice held a trace of old sorrow. Place where Apache can still be free. Are there others of your people there? He shook his head. Not now. Sometimes small hunting parties pass through. Old ones who refused reservation sometimes hide there, but mostly it is empty. Sarah absorbed this information. So we'll be alone. Swift Arrow glanced at her, reading the unspoken question. Yes, but you have my word. You will be safe. I know that, she said softly. And she did know it, with a certainty that should have been surprising but somehow wasn't. They walked in companionable silence until the terrain began to change, the flat desert giving way to rocky foothills. Swift Arrow guided her through a narrow pass, the way growing steeper. Sarah's legs ached with the effort, but she pressed on without complaint, determined not to slow their progress. When they stopped to rest near a stunted juniper, Sarah took a small sip of water, rationing their dwindling supply. Swift Arrow was scanning the path ahead when he suddenly stiffened, his body alert like a deer sensing a predator. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. He motioned for silence, moving forward to investigate. Sarah waited, heart pounding, until he returned moments later. "Tracks," he said, his voice tight. "Not soldiers, different men, heading same direction we are." "The bandits?" Sarah asked, a chill running through her despite the warm night. Swift Arrow nodded grimly. "3 men, heavy boots, 1 horse limping, same men who attacked wagons, same men who raided my village." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her throat, remembering the terror of that day, the sound of gunshots, her parents' screams. "They're going to your hidden valley?" "Appears so. Perhaps they seek place to hide after raids." His expression hardened. "They do not know I tracked them again." The implication was clear. The hunt that had been interrupted when he found her was about to resume. Sarah felt a complicated mix of emotions. Fear at the prospect of confronting the men who had murdered her family, but also a fierce desire for justice. "What will you do?" she asked. Swift Arrow's eyes met hers, dark and determined. "What I must. These men have blood of my people on hands, blood of your family. They must pay price." Sarah straightened, squaring her shoulders. "We," she corrected. "What will we do? They killed my parents too. This isn't just your fight anymore." Surprise flickered across Swift Arrow's face, followed by something that might have been respect or concern. "Revenge, dangerous path, Sarah Collins. Changes person who walks it." "I'm already changed," she said simply. "There's no going back to who I was before." He studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Together then. But you follow my lead. These men dangerous, killers without honor." As they prepared to continue their journey, now with a new urgency driving their steps, Sarah realized how far she had traveled from the life she once knew, not just in distance, but in herself. The proper young woman who had left St. Louis would never have imagined standing side by side with an Apache warrior, planning to confront murderers in the wilderness. Yet here she was, her heart beating with a strange mixture of fear and determination, following Swift Arrow into the darkness ahead. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the grief still fresh in her heart, she felt more alive than she ever had before. Dawn found them crouched on a rocky ridge, overlooking a narrow canyon. Below, barely visible in the grey light, 3 men slept around the dying embers of a small fire. Their horses were tethered nearby, one indeed favoring its right foreleg, just as Swift Arrow had predicted. Rifles leaned against saddlebags within easy reach of their owners. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she gazed down at the sleeping forms. These were the men who had gunned down her parents in cold blood, who had left her for dead beside the shattered wagon, the men whose actions had irrevocably altered the course of her life. "I recognize them," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "The one with the red beard, he was the leader. He's the one who shot my father." Swift Arrow's face was impassive, but his eyes burned with cold intensity. "Man with scar on chin killed elder in my village, woman's brother. Shot him in back while he tried to protect children." For a moment they were silent, united in their hatred for the men below. Then Swift Arrow touched Sarah's arm, guiding her back from the ridge. "We wait," he said, once they were out of earshot of the camp. "Follow them. Learn their plan before we strike." "Strike?" Sarah echoed, sudden uncertainty flickering through her. The abstract notion of justice was rapidly becoming a concrete reality. "You mean kill them?" Swift Arrow regarded her steadily. "These men would not hesitate to kill us, have already killed those we love. What did you think would happen when we found them?" Sarah exhaled slowly, confronting the truth of her own intentions. "I don't know. I've never..." I've never wished death on anyone before. And now? She closed her eyes briefly, seeing again her father's body sprawled in the dust, her mother's unseeing gaze fixed on the empty sky. Now I want them to pay for what they've done, she admitted, but the thought of watching them die... No, you do not have to watch, Swift Arrow said, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it, or participate. This burden I can carry alone. His offer touched her deeply, but Sarah shook her head. No, I won't hide while you face danger. Whatever happens, we face it together. A look passed between them, understanding, respect, and something more, something neither was ready to name. They spent the day observing the bandits from a distance, moving parallel to their path through the increasingly rugged terrain. The three men were making their way steadily toward the hidden valley, stopping occasionally to rest their horses or to scan the horizon with a battered spyglass. They act like hunted men, Sarah observed as they watched from the shelter of a rock formation, always looking over their shoulders. They know soldiers search for them, Swift Arrow replied, probably have bounty on heads by now. Yet they're heading deeper into the wilderness instead of trying to reach Mexico or somewhere they could disappear. Swift Arrow nodded. They seek something specific, or someone. As evening approached, clouds began to gather on the western horizon, dark, heavy with the promise of rain. Swift Arrow eyed them with concern. Storm coming, bad one. How can you tell? Smell in air. Way birds fly low, will hit by nightfall. He scanned their surroundings. Need better shelter than rocks tonight. The bandits below had apparently reached the same conclusion. They were picking up their pace, heading toward a line of cliffs in the distance where shelter might be found. Swift Arrow led Sarah on a different route, moving quickly but carefully across the uneven ground. The wind began to rise, carrying with it the earthy scent of approaching rain. By the time the first heavy drops began to fall, they had reached a small overhang carved into the side of a cliff. Not quite a cave, but enough to provide shelter from the worst of the elements. Sarah huddled against the rock wall, watching as the sky opened up and sheets of rain turned the world grey. Lightning flashed across the darkening sky, followed seconds later by the deep rumble of thunder. Swift Arrow sat beside her, his body a barrier between her and the storm's fury. Desert storms, violent but quick, he said, as the wind howled around them. We'll pass by morning. The close quarters and the roaring storm created a strange intimacy. Sarah found herself studying Swift Arrow's profile in the dim light. The proud line of his nose, the strong set of his jaw, the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow. She wondered about the stories behind each mark on his skin, each shadow in his eyes. "You're staring again," he said without looking at her. Sarah didn't look away this time. "I'm trying to understand you." Now he turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. "What is there to understand?" "Everything," she said simply. "You're unlike any man I've ever known." A flash of lightning illuminated his face, throwing his features into sharp relief for an instant before darkness reclaimed them. "You know few men, then," he said. "I've known plenty. Churchmen with their pious words and wandering hands, businessmen like William who see women as transactions, soldiers who view the world as territory to be conquered." Sarah drew her knees up to her chest. "But you saved an enemy's life when you had every reason to leave me to die. You've shown me more respect as a person than most white men ever did." Swift Arrow was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps I am not good example of Apache man either." "What do you mean?" He sighed, watching the rain. "Many of my people would not have helped white woman, would say it betrays our own." His voice grew distant, as if speaking from a place of old pain. "Some already call me traitor for time as scout, say I am caught between two worlds, belonging to neither." Sarah felt a sharp pang of recognition. "I know what that's like. I never quite fit in St. Louis society. Too questioning, too independent. Then on the frontier, I was too refined, too educated. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. Now I'm a white woman traveling with an Apache warrior. I don't think there's a place in either world for what I've become. Perhaps we make our own place, Swift Arrow said quietly. Their eyes met again, and something shifted between them. A recognition of shared isolation, of kindred spirits finding each other against impossible odds. A particularly violent gust of wind drove rain into their shelter, breaking the moment. Sarah shivered as the cold water spattered against her skin. Without hesitation, Swift Arrow moved closer, offering the warmth of his body. "Storm will get worse before better," he said. "Need to preserve heat." Sarah nodded, allowing him to draw her against his side. His arm encircled her shoulders, solid and secure. The gesture was practical, born of survival necessity, yet she couldn't ignore the quickening of her pulse at his proximity. "Tell me more about your people," she said, partly to distract herself from the warmth spreading through her body. Not the things written in books by white men, but the real stories. And so, as the storm raged around them, Swift Arrow spoke of the Apache world, of creation myths and trickster tales, of coming-of-age ceremonies and marriage customs, of the deep spiritual connection to the land that white settlers could never understand. Sarah listened, entranced, asking questions that revealed her genuine interest and respect. In turn, she told him of her life in St. Louis, of books and music, of the Mississippi River's mighty flow, of social gatherings and the complex, often hypocritical rules that governed civilized society. "Your world sounds complicated," Swift Arrow observed. "It is, full of unwritten rules and expectations. Appearances matter more than truths." Sarah sighed. "I think that's why my father was so eager to leave. He felt suffocated by it all, though he would never admit that. He called it a holy mission, but sometimes I wonder if he was just running away. And you, were you running too?" The question caught her off guard. "I was following my parents," she said automatically, then paused, considering more deeply. "But yes, perhaps I was also running from a future that felt predetermined, from becoming just another proper wife in a proper house with a proper life I never chose." Lightning flashed again, illuminating Swift Arrow's face as he studied her. "And now? What future you see now, Sarah Collins?" She looked into his eyes, dark pools that seemed to hold mysteries she was only beginning to understand. "I don't know," she whispered truthfully. "For the first time in my life, I can't see the path ahead. And strangely, that doesn't frighten me as much as it should." The storm continued through the night, but wrapped in Swift Arrow's protective embrace, Sarah eventually drifted into sleep. She dreamed not of the horrors she had witnessed, but of wide open spaces and endless possibilities, and of a man who walked beside her, neither leading nor following, but matching her step for step across an unexplored landscape. Morning broke with startling clarity, the storm having washed the world clean. The desert air smelled of wet stone and sage, and the sky arched overhead in an uninterrupted expanse of perfect blue. Sarah woke to find herself still nestled against Swift Arrow's chest, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. For a moment she remained still, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. It should have felt improper, scandalous even, this closeness with a man who was neither her husband nor her kin. Yet it felt right in a way she couldn't explain, as if some greater truth had eclipsed the artificial constraints of her former life. "You're awake," Swift Arrow said softly, his breath warm against her hair. Sarah sat up slowly, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes, thank you for keeping me warm." He nodded, rising to his feet in one fluid motion, to survey the landscape beyond their shelter. Storm changed terrain, washed away tracks, but I know where they go. The events of yesterday came rushing back, their pursuit of the bandits, the approaching confrontation that awaited them. Sarah pushed herself upright, brushing dust from her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. How far are we from the hidden valley? Half day's journey, less if we move quickly. Swift Arrow turned to look at her, his expression grave. Bandits will reach it first. We'll have advantage. What will we do? Wait, watch, choose moment carefully. He handed her the water skin. They not expect us. That is our strength. They set off as soon as Sarah had taken a few sips of water and smoothed her hair back into a simple braid. The storm had transformed the landscape overnight, carving new channels in the earth and toppling weak trees. Swift Arrow moved with unwavering confidence despite these changes, reading the land like a map only he could see. By midday, the terrain began to change dramatically. The barren desert gave way to scattered juniper trees, then to more substantial growth, pinyon pines and even a few stunted oaks clinging to the increasingly rocky soil. The air grew cooler, fresher. Sarah could smell water, not just damp earth from the recent rain, but the distinctive scent of a running stream. "We're getting close, aren't we?" "Close, aren't?" she asked as they paused in the shade of a large boulder. Swift Arrow nodded. "Just beyond that ridge." He pointed to a rugged line of cliffs ahead, valley hidden between those walls. "And the bandits? Already there." His expression darkened. "Smoke from fire, they make camp by lake." Sarah's heart quickened, both with apprehension and a strange, fierce anticipation. After days of running, of hiding, of nursing wounds both physical and emotional, the moment of reckoning was finally at hand. Swift Arrow must have sensed her thoughts, for he placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Stay close to me. Do exactly as I say." His dark eyes held hers intently. "Promise me." "I promise," she said, understanding the gravity behind his words. This was no longer a theoretical pursuit. Lives would be at stake, including their own. They approached the ridge cautiously, using the abundant cover to mask their movements. As they neared the top, Swift Arrow motioned for Sarah to stay low. Together, they crept to a position that allowed them to see down into the valley below. Sarah gasped softly. The hidden valley deserved its name, a secret paradise nestled between towering cliffs. A small lake gleamed like polished silver in the afternoon sun, fed by a waterfall cascading down the far wall. Lush greenery surrounded the water's edge, and trees taller than any she'd seen since leaving Missouri created patches of inviting shade. And there, on the near shore of the lake, the three bandits had made their camp. Their horses grazed nearby, and a cook fire sent a thin column of smoke into the cloudless sky. The men themselves were moving with purpose, though from this distance it was difficult to discern exactly what they were doing. "What are they looking for?" Sarah whispered. Swift Arrow studied their movements with narrowed eyes. Not looking, building. As Sarah watched more closely, she realized he was right. The bandits appeared to be constructing some kind of shelter, more substantial than a temporary camp. "They're settling in," she said with dawning understanding. "They think they've found a safe haven." Swift Arrow nodded grimly. "Place where no one will find them, where they can hide from consequences of their actions." His hand tightened on his rifle. "They are wrong." They watched for another hour as the sun began its westward descent. The bandits' movements revealed a routine. The man with the red beard seemed to be the leader, giving orders and doing the least work. The scarred man tended the horses and kept watch, his rifle always within reach. The third, younger than the others, did most of the physical labor, carrying water and gathering firewood. "Night," Swift Arrow finally said. "We wait for darkness." They withdrew to a sheltered spot on the ridge to prepare. Swift Arrow checked his rifle, knife, and the few arrows he carried. Sarah watched him with growing anxiety, the reality of what was to come settling over her like a heavy cloak. "Swift Arrow," she said softly, "what if something goes wrong? What if you're hurt? Or—" She couldn't bring herself to speak the worst possibility. "Then you run," he said without hesitation. "You know direction to nearest settlement, 3 days east, staying near water." "I won't leave you," Sarah protested. Swift Arrow turned to face her fully, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "Sarah Collins," he said, her name sounding different in his voice, weighted with meaning. "I did not save your life to see it ended by these men. If I fall, you must live. This I ask of you." The intensity in his eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. "And what about you? Why is my life worth more than yours?" "Not about worth, about promise." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek without quite touching it. "I promised myself when I found you that you would see another sunrise. I keep that promise." Sarah caught his hand in hers, pressing it against her face. "Then make me another promise. Promise you'll be careful. Promise you'll come back to me." Something flickered in Swift Arrow's eyes, surprise, tenderness, and a hunger that made Sarah's heart race. For a moment, she thought he might pull away. Instead, he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. She didn't move, her eyes holding his as the space between them narrowed. When his lips touched hers, the contact was gentle, almost reverent, a question rather than a demand. Sarah answered by leaning into him, her free hand finding his shoulder. The kiss deepened, crossing boundaries of race and culture and propriety with the same quiet determination that had carried them through the desert. When they finally parted, Sarah felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if pieces of herself that had been adrift had finally found their proper alignment. "I promise," Swift Arrow said, his voice roughened by emotion. As twilight descended over the hidden valley, they made their final preparations. The plan was simple but dangerous. Swift Arrow would approach the camp under cover of darkness, while Sarah remained hidden on high ground with the rifle. If things went wrong, she would fire a warning shot to distract the bandits, giving him a chance to retreat. "Remember," Swift Arrow told her as he prepared to leave, "you are my eyes from above. Watch all 3 men. If one disappears from sight, signal with owl call." Sarah nodded, her hands steady on the rifle despite her racing heart. "I'll be watching." Before he melted into the gathering darkness, Swift Arrow looked back at her one last time. No words were spoken, but the look that passed between them carried all that remained unsaid: fear and hope, newfound love, and the shadow of possible loss. Then he was gone, moving like his namesake through the twilight, leaving Sarah alone with the rifle, the weight of their shared purpose, and the memory of his lips on hers. From her vantage point, Sarah could see the bandits' camp clearly in the light of their fire. The 3 men were sharing a bottle, their raucous laughter occasionally carried upward by the night breeze. They felt safe here, secure in their isolation. They had no idea that justice was approaching on silent feet. Sarah's eyes strained in the darkness, searching for any sign of Swift Arrow's movement. A shadow here, a ripple of displacement there, subtle signs that would be invisible to anyone who hadn't learned to see the way she now did. Her world had narrowed to this moment, this vigil, her breath shallow and controlled as she waited for whatever would come next. Then she saw him, a darker shadow among shadows, approaching the edge of the firelight. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Swift Arrow paused, coiled like a predator about to strike. In that moment, with night closing around the valley and fate hanging in the balance, Sarah realized that regardless of the outcome of this confrontation, she had already been transformed beyond recognition. The woman she had been would never have understood the woman she had become. A woman who had found strength in adversity, wisdom in suffering, and love in the most unlikely of places. And as Swift Arrow stepped into the light to confront the men who had altered both their lives, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that she would never regret the path that had brought her here, to this place, to this moment, to him. The world narrowed to the circle of firelight below as Sarah watched Swift Arrow step from the shadows. The bandits froze mid-laughter, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons. But Swift Arrow stood tall and unafraid, his rifle pointed steadily at the red-bearded leader. "Do not move," he commanded in clear English. "Your death's not necessary if you surrender." The leader recovered quickly from his shock, a cold smile spreading beneath his matted beard. Well, well, a lone Apache thinks he can take 3 armed men." His eyes narrowed. "Wait, I know you. You're that scout who turned renegade. Army's got a price on your head almost as high as ours." Swift Arrow's expression remained impassive. "I am not here for bounty. I am here for justice. You killed elders in my village, murdered family of white woman." A flicker of unease crossed the leader's face, quickly masked by bravado. "Don't know what you're talking about, Injun. We're just prospectors looking for a quiet place to work our claim." "Lies," Swift Arrow said flatly. "You are raiders, killers. You attacked wagon 3 days south of here, left woman for dead." The scarred man spat into the fire. "If we did, she's dead now. Ain't nobody survives out there without water or horse." From her hidden position, Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. The casual dismissal of her life, the complete lack of remorse, it kindled a rage that burned hot in her chest. But she remembered her promise to Swift Arrow and held steady, watching, waiting. "She lives," Swift Arrow said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "And she watches you now." The 3 men exchanged glances, suddenly alert to the possibility of another threat in the darkness beyond their fire. The younger bandit, barely more than a boy, looked genuinely frightened. "Listen," the leader said, his tone shifting to one of negotiation. "There's no need for this to get messy. We've got gold, plenty to share." He gestured to a saddlebag near the fire. "Take it and go. Nobody needs to die tonight." Swift Arrow's aim didn't waver. "Drop weapons, kneel. You will face justice for your crimes." The leader's false smile vanished. "You think you can march us to some fort? Turn us in? They'll hang you right alongside us, redskin. Not fort, Apache justice." A tense silence fell. The scarred man was slowly shifting position, edging toward a rifle propped against a nearby log. Sarah tracked his movement, ready to fire if he reached for it. "Now!" the leader suddenly shouted, diving for his pistol as the other men scrambled for their weapons. Everything happened in a blur of motion. Swift Arrow fired, his shot catching the leader in the shoulder and spinning him around. The scarred man lunged for his rifle, but froze as a shot from Sarah's position kicked up dirt at his feet. "Next one goes through your heart," Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "Don't touch it!" The young bandit had managed to grab a pistol, but he held it with trembling hands, his eyes darting wildly between Swift Arrow and the darkness where Sarah's voice had come from. "2 of you?" The leader gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Who's out there?" "My name is Sarah Collins," she called back, moving positions as Swift Arrow had taught her. "You murdered my parents by Dixon Creek, shot them in cold blood while they begged for mercy." Recognition dawned on the leader's face. "The preacher's daughter? You should be buzzard food by now." "She lives," Swift Arrow repeated, advancing on the wounded man. "Now you choose, surrender or die." The young bandit suddenly threw down his pistol. "I ain't dying here. I never killed nobody, I swear. They made me join them, said they'd kill me if I didn't." "Shut your mouth, boy," the scarred man snarled. But panic had overtaken the youth. It was them who planned it all, said we'd hit the Apache camp first, make it look like Indians when we robbed the wagons after. Make everybody blame the Redskins while we got rich. Sarah's blood ran cold at the calculation of it. Not just murder, but a deliberate attempt to incite more violence between settlers and Apache. More death, more hatred, more blood spilled on both sides. The scarred man, seeing his companion's betrayal, made his decision. With a roar of rage, he lunged for his rifle. Sarah fired, but in the chaotic moment her shot went wide. Swift Arrow spun to face the new threat, but the leader seized the opportunity, drawing a hidden knife and launching himself at Swift Arrow's back. "Behind you!" Sarah screamed. Swift Arrow turned just in time to dodge the knife, but the leader's momentum carried them both to the ground. They grappled in the dust, each fighting for control of the blade. Meanwhile, the scarred man had reached his rifle and was bringing it to bear. Sarah had no choice. She steadied her aim and pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed across the valley as the scarred man staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face before he crumpled to the ground. The leader, distracted by his companion's fall, loosened his grip just enough for Swift Arrow to gain the advantage. With a powerful twist, he disarmed his opponent and pinned him to the earth, the knife now at the bandit's throat. "Please!" The young bandit was sobbing, kneeling with his hands raised. "I'll confess to everything. Just don't kill me." For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Swift Arrow held the knife against the leader's throat, his face a mask of righteous fury. Sarah watched, holding her breath, knowing what justice demanded, but uncertain what mercy might cost. "Swift Arrow," she called softly, emerging from her hiding place and starting down the slope. "It's over." His head turned toward her voice, and in that moment of distraction, the leader made one final desperate attempt. His hand closed around a handful of dirt, which he flung into Swift Arrow's eyes. Swift Arrow recoiled instinctively, and the leader surged upward, reaching for the knife. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah, still descending the slope, raised her rifle again, but before she could fire, Swift Arrow recovered with lightning speed. The knife flashed in the firelight, and the leader's attack ended before it truly began. He fell back, eyes wide with shock, blood blossoming across his chest. By the time Sarah reached the camp, it was over. The leader lay still, his eyes fixed on the night sky. The scarred man had not moved from where he'd fallen. Only the young bandit remained alive, trembling and weeping as Swift Arrow bound his hands with leather strips. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked, rushing to Swift Arrow's side. He shook his head, though she could see scratches on his face and arms from the struggle. "Justice is done," he said quietly. Sarah looked at the two dead men, feeling not triumph, but a somber weight. "Yes," she agreed, "though it brings my parents no closer back." "Death never does," Swift Arrow said. "But perhaps their spirits rest easier now." Dawn found them sitting by the lake's edge, the beauty of the hidden valley now unmarred by the presence of the bandits. They had buried the dead far from the water, a task undertaken in silence. The young bandit, Billy Thornton was his name, remained bound but had been given food and water. He had talked through the night, confessing everything in a desperate bid to save himself. "What will we do with him?" Sarah asked, watching the youth doze fitfully against a tree. "Take him to nearest settlement. Let him tell his story to proper authorities." Swift Arrow's expression was resolute. "Let truth be known about who really attacked wagons, who really killed settlers." Sarah nodded. It was important that people knew that the cycle of blame and retribution that kept Apache and settler at each other's throats might be broken, even if just this once. "And after that?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate plans. Swift Arrow turned to her, his eyes softening as they rested on her face. "What do you want, Sarah Collins? You could return to your people now. Start new life in settlement." The thought brought no comfort, no sense of rightness. Sarah reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "My people," she said slowly, "were killed beside that wagon, and any life I might have had in the white world died with them." She met his gaze steadily. "These past days with you, living by our wits, sleeping beneath the stars, learning to see the world through new eyes, I've been more alive than I ever was before." "Life with me would not be easy," Swift Arrow warned, though his fingers tightened around hers. "Neither your world nor mine would accept us easily. We would always live between, apart." "Then we'll make our own world," Sarah said, echoing his words from days earlier. "Here, perhaps. Or wherever we can find peace." Swift Arrow's free hand rose to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You would choose this life with me." "I already have," Sarah said simply. His kiss was different this time, not a question, but an answer, not a possibility, but a promise. When they separated, the rising sun caught in Sarah's hair, turning it to living gold. "There is ceremony among my people," Swift Arrow said, "when man and woman choose each other, not like white wedding, but sacred still." Sarah smiled, tears of joy pricking at her eyes. "Will you teach me, so I can honor your traditions properly?" The smile that transformed Swift Arrow's face then was like the dawn breaking over the desert, rare, breathtaking, illuminating. They remained in the hidden valley for many days, giving Sarah time to heal completely and allowing them to prepare for the journey ahead. They would take Billy Thornton to the nearest settlement, ensure his testimony was heard, and then they would begin the life they had chosen together. It would not be without challenges. There would be those on both sides who would condemn them, who would see their love as a betrayal of blood and heritage. But in each other, they had found something worth fighting for, a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding that had divided their peoples for generations. On their final evening in the valley, they stood together beside the waterfall, hands joined as Swift Arrow taught Sarah the words of the Apache marriage blessing. Above them, the first stars of evening pierced the darkening sky, eternal witnesses to this union that defied all expectations. "My heart to yours," Swift Arrow said in his native tongue, then translated for her. "My heart to yours," Sarah repeated, first in English, then carefully in Apache, the unfamiliar words feeling right on her lips. "My path to yours," he continued, "my path to yours. As the eagle mates for life, so I am bound to you until death and beyond." Sarah's voice grew stronger with each vow, her commitment absolute. "As the eagle mates for life, so I am bound to you until death and beyond." As the ancient words wove around them, binding them together before the eyes of the Great Spirit, Sarah thought of how far she had traveled from the prim preacher's daughter she had once been. That journey had begun in tragedy, in blood and loss and fear, but it had led her here to this moment of perfect clarity. She had found not just love, but understanding. Not just passion, but purpose. In Swift Arrow's eyes, she saw not her past, but her future. A future neither of them could have imagined when he first lifted that cloth from her face beside a shattered wagon in the merciless desert sun. "I can breathe now," she whispered as he drew her into his embrace. "For the first time in my life, I can truly breathe." And as night fell over the hidden valley, two souls from worlds once divided stood united against whatever tomorrow might bring, together, free, and finally, completely alive.